Maria.
China is not happy about a potential meeting between Taiwan's president and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in Los Angeles next week. A spokesperson says if the two leaders meet, Beijing will, quote, definitely take measures to resolutely fight back. Senator James Lankford says more than 1 million acres of Oklahoma farmland is currently owned by foreign entities, and nations like China are using the land to farm illegal drugs.
Chinese criminal organizations have moved into my state in mass numbers. The year after marijuana was legalized in my state for quote-unquote medical purposes, we had more land sales to foreign entities in Oklahoma than any other state in America, as Chinese criminal organizations and Mexican cartels immediately moved in to be able to set up shop in distribution nationwide.
That was extraordinary. Joining me right now is the man himself, Oklahoma Senator and member of the Homeland Security, Finance, Select Committee on Intelligence and Ethics Committees. James Lankford is here. Senator, thanks very much for being here. Quite an education you gave us yesterday in that hearing. I want you to tell us more about it, because this whole time we're worried about the CCP buying up land in a number of states, but that land is next to our military installations. So I assume that the CCP wanted to spy on our military installations by having that land so close. But you're bringing up another issue. They're buying the land and then turning it into farmland for drug production?
They 100% are. So these are Chinese criminal organizations that are moving in, and you're not going to move in and move that much money without some awareness of the Chinese Communist Party in setting up. Just in the last year, China has doubled the number of acres that it has in the United States. They're buying up hundreds of thousands of acres across the country, and they're moving in criminal operations into the country. So this is an awareness that is a gap in federal law, what we call the CFIUS review. That review is typically about healthcare companies or tech companies or technology, whether we're going to transfer those or allow those to be owned by a foreign entity. But agricultural land is left out of that review. I'm trying to change that to say we've got to be attentive to what China is currently trying to do in our country.
Well, of course you should change that. You have to move to change that. Thanks for your leadership on this. But, Senator, are you and your colleagues making a difference here? Because we talk about China and its goals every single day, and the fact that they have become inside the gates, as Mike Pompeo says it. They are, in fact, inside the gates of America, whether it be infiltrating our academia, our universities, Hollywood, corporate America, and they're doing so while also conducting sinister moves, whether it be producing the underlying chemicals for fentanyl, what you're saying, buying up land and creating drug farms. What are we doing as a country to stop communist China from moving forward on all of these goals to overtake the United States as the #1 superpower?
Piece by piece on this, we've got to be able to do our military work. We've got to make sure that we have what's called hard power on this to be able to make it very clear that we are the United States of America and we're none to be trifled with. The second thing that we've got to do is deal with economic issues. Every corporation in America needs to look at the business that it's doing currently with China. If their supply chain comes from China to the United States, know that the communist nation will at some point cut that off. And so they need to be attentive to that in all of their investment strategies and all of their logistics tail. If they have China anywhere in that logistics tail, that's a major problem. And then we got to deal with legal issues that are here in the United States, whether it's, as you mentioned, universities, which I've spoken at often on the Confucius Institutes that are in universities. Many universities, including in my state, have pushed those out and have said we see those for what they are. This is actually trying to place individuals in the university to be able to be a spy here on this campus.
Yeah.
So they're pushing those out, and we're going to continue to be able to find every single area that we can. We've got to take world leadership back again and to be able to say we're the United States in foreign policy and in economic power.
Well, Senator, I guess what I'm asking you is, why is this so hard? I mean, look, you and your colleagues on the Republican side have come up with ways to actually begin to attack this. You know, you've even got on the House side this Select Committee on China. You're talking about the supply chains and how reliant we are on the CCP. But let's face it, until you took the gavel, the House took the gavel, you all had not had one hearing on the origins of COVID-19. What is going on with your colleagues on the Democrat side? Why has this been so hard to actually take a stand against communist China?
Yeah, they refused to actually take a stand against communist China until recently, and now suddenly it's become a bipartisan issue, I think, because it's so incredibly obvious and the American people see it. And the big issue, I mean, you can look at the NBA even, and Ennis Freedom getting kicked out of the NBA because he spoke out against China, and the NBA said, we're not going to do anything to be able to upset China in that business model. You see that in business areas, but you also see that in politics at this point, where they're making movies in Hollywood or whether it may be. They don't want to ruffle the feathers there. The issue is China is on the move, and they're aggressively coming after every sector of our economy, and we need to pay attention to that and push back.
There was no response to a surveillance balloon traveling almost the entire country. There was no response to the fact that China covered up COVID-19 and will not allow an investigation into the Wuhan lab. Will there be no response that China is now threatening Kevin McCarthy, and if he meets with the president of Taiwan? They already threatened, the former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, threatened that they were going to blow up the plane when she landed. And all we keep hearing from this administration is we do not seek conflict with China. Really?
Yeah. Well, we don't seek conflict with China, but we also seek to be able to push back on their push on us on it and make it very clear who the world superpower is and to be able to engage on this. Nancy Pelosi had the right to be able to be in Taiwan. Kevin McCarthy has the right to be able to meet with the Taiwanese leader. That's very, very clear, and we should make it very clear on that.
Kayleigh, jump in.
Senator, it's pretty clear that China is trying to undermine the United States from the inside out by making us a nation of addicts. We're addicted to drugs. Our youth are addicted to TikTok, another Chinese spyware site. How can we raise public awareness about what China is trying to do, especially to young adults?
Yeah, the painful thing is I talk to some folks that they'll say, well, American companies spy on me, Google spies on me, everything else on it, so it's no big deal if the Chinese do. It's very, very different to have the Communist government of China actually gathering data, harvesting that, collecting all of your connections. That is very different than what's happening for marketing strategies versus American companies. And the United States government is not connected to all of those companies. Google is not turning over all their data to the United States government to be able to track individuals. That is something that happens with a company in marketing, not in a government that is trying to be able to track, harvest, and gather information about individuals and families. So it is very, very different what's happening. A lot of this is going to be information and people being aware. And quite frankly, it still goes back to American companies that are doing business in China and that have their logistics tail there. They have got to pay attention to that and start actively moving their logistics and all their manufacturing out of China, because there will be a day that China will cut that off. And people should watch and see when Russia invades Ukraine, it was that week everything was cut off in Ukraine. If China invades Taiwan, it will be that week that everything is cut off in China, and every American company needs to be prepared for that.
Yeah, and instead, our policies have all the major indexes include Chinese companies, and money managers are pretty much funding the expansion of communist China. These companies are also in the thrift fund, which is the 401k, the retirement for government employees, which is also incredible to me. Senator, we're going to keep a spotlight on it. Thank you, sir.
You bet. Good to see you again.
James Lankford is in D.C. this morning. We'll be right back.